Let's begin with the truth that most people never consider. No one is born antisocial. You might enter the world with a temperament, maybe a quiet soul, a mind that prefers depth over chatter, a heart that feels too much too quickly. But these are not defects. They are differences. What society often labels as antisocial is rarely a matter of personality. It's more often a matter of protection, a response to wounds we couldn't name, let alone heal. It starts early, maybe earlier than you even remember. Picture a child, full of energy, full of curiosity, walking up to a group during recess. Their small voice offers, "Can I play too?" But the response is laughter, exclusion, a quiet dismissal masked as a joke. The child laughs too, trying to stay included. But inside, something shifts. They learn something that day. Reaching out can hurt, or maybe they raise their hand in class, offering an idea they were proud of, only to be overlooked, or corrected, or ignored. Or later, they open up to a friend, only to be gossiped about behind their back. Or they finally trust someone in their teenage years, only to be abandoned when it mattered most. These moments don't always leave visible scars, but they leave impressions, and impressions shape identities. Bit by bit, disappointment becomes doctrine. The child who wanted to belong becomes the teen who rolls their eyes at group activities. The teen who once hoped to be seen becomes the adult who claims they prefer solitude. But the truth behind the evolution is rarely examined, because it hurts to look. Here's what often hides beneath that so-called independence, a belief that it's safer not to try, not because connection isn't desired, but because every time the heart reached outward, the result was pain, sometimes sharp, sometimes subtle, but always remembered. And so, the retreat begins. But it's not a dramatic exit, no grand declarations of isolation, no visible walls. It's quieter than that. It's skipping a party because I'm tired. It's leaving texts on read because they probably didn't mean it anyway. It's eating lunch alone and calling it preference. It's smiling at others while slowly fading from their circle. From the outside, this might look like choice. She's just introverted. He's independent. They're low maintenance. But inside, a different narrative plays. What started as self-protection becomes self-abandonment. What began as a strategy becomes a story, a mask. And here's what's tricky. The mask doesn't feel like a mask. Over time, you forget it's even there. You believe the persona. You tell yourself you just don't like people. That drama is beneath you. That small talk is unbearable. That you've evolved past the need for emotional closeness. But those stories are not the whole truth. They are half-truths, twisted by experience, reinforced by fear. Because deep down, beneath the rationale and rehearsed detachment, another voice lingers. Quieter, more vulnerable. It whispers, "Remember when you used to try? Remember when you wanted someone to care? Remember when connection felt worth the risk?" That voice is hard to hear through the noise of defense mechanisms. But it never leaves. It just waits. And here's the paradox of the mask. It protects you while it isolates you. It shelters you while it separates you. It preserves you while it erases you. At first, there's power in detachment. There's comfort in control. If no one gets close, no one can leave. If no one knows you, no one can reject you. It feels like maturity, like peace, like freedom. But over time, something else grows. A hollowness. Not just loneliness in the typical sense, not just empty weekends or unanswered messages, but a deeper, more aching loneliness. The kind that persists even in a crowd. The kind that doesn't disappear with distractions. The kind that makes you wonder, do I even know who I am anymore? Because the longer the mask is worn, the harder it is to tell where the mask ends and the real self begins. The boundary blurs. You see yourself through the lens of protection. You speak from a place of caution. You live half hidden. Until one day you see someone, maybe a stranger, maybe a friend, laughing freely, connected deeply, vulnerable without fear. And something stirs in you. Not envy, exactly. More like ache, like longing. You wonder, what would that feel like, to be seen and still loved? But just as the thought arises, the mask tightens. The old stories echo. They'll leave. They won't understand. You're too much. Better not. So you stay quiet. Again. This is not weakness. It's not cowardice. It's programming, survival. Your nervous system learned that vulnerability leads to pain. So it shut the door. And that worked, until it didn't, because eventually the price of protection becomes too high. You begin to realize the fortress you built to stay safe has also become your prison. And the worst part? You locked yourself inside. The mask may have started as a choice, but now it feels like a necessity, a role you don't know how to step out of. And the longer you wear it, the more you forget who you were before it. Here's the truth most people never say aloud. You're not antisocial, you're wounded, you're tired, you're guarded, but you're also still human, which means no matter how far you've retreated, some part of you still longs to return. Not to a perfect fairy tale version of connection, but to something real, something safe, something seen. And that return starts with one small act. Not a leap, not a confession, not even a conversation. Just this, the decision to be honest with yourself about what you want, about what you miss, about what you need. Because healing doesn't begin with others. It begins inside, in the quiet moments where you stop performing and start listening. Where you say, I'm not okay with being this disconnected anymore. That single truth opens a door, not wide at first, not easily, but just enough to let the light in. Enough to see that you've been living in a shadow of who you were meant to be. And more importantly, enough to believe that you don't have to stay there. In the first part of this journey, we unearthed the roots of emotional isolation. We peeled back the layers of what we often call antisocial behavior and discovered something far more human. A survival mechanism. A carefully constructed mask built not from disdain, but from pain. And behind that mask, a silent ache, not for attention, but for authenticity. Not for company, but for connection. But to understand why so many of us stay trapped there, between wanting love and avoiding it, we have to enter a more complex landscape. A place not only shaped by fear, but ruled by paradox. This is where we encounter the double bind. It's one of the most psychologically tormenting experiences a human being can face. Being caught between two opposing internal forces, each making the other impossible to act on. And when it comes to emotional isolation, this double bind is shaped by two powerful, often unconscious emotional currents, shame and superiority. Let's begin with shame. Shame is ancient. It doesn't arrive in adulthood. It's something we absorb in childhood, often before we even understand the concept of self. It's in the quiet moments we felt ignored. It's in the disapproving looks we received for crying too loudly, needing too much, dreaming too big. It's in the subtle, repeated messages that who we are, fundamentally, is too much. Or worse, not enough. Shame doesn't simply whisper that you made a mistake. It hisses that you are the mistake. And so, when someone who has built a life around emotional safety starts to feel the urge to connect, to send a message, to open up, to step toward vulnerability, shame is the first ghost to arrive. What if they laugh at you? What if you share your heart and they ignore it? What if you try and they leave anyway? Shame makes emotional honesty feel not just risky, but existentially dangerous. It frames rejection not as something that happens to you, but as proof that you deserve it. And so, like a child learning not to touch a hot stove, you learn not to touch your own longing. You learn that showing too much desire, or too much emotion, or too much need will be punished, not with violence necessarily, but with silence, with withdrawal, with the slow death of dignity that comes from being seen and not valued. But the story doesn't end there, because shame, powerful as it is, eventually becomes unbearable. The psyche, your emotional system, needs balance. It needs to escape the weight of always feeling wrong, inferior, or invisible. And when that happens, it doesn't always move toward healing. Sometimes it compensates. It constructs another emotional strategy, one that looks nothing like shame, but is born from the same wound. This is superiority. Where shame says you're not enough, superiority says you're too good for all of this. It offers the illusion of elevation. It reframes loneliness as independence. It rebrands emotional isolation as emotional maturity. I don't need people like that. I've outgrown shallow relationships. I'd rather be alone than surrounded by fake friends. These statements can feel empowering. They can even sound wise. And sometimes they are. But often they're just another layer of armor, a story we tell ourselves not because it's fully true, but because it hurts less than the truth. Because the truth might be, I don't trust that anyone will stay if they really know me. I'm afraid I'll be judged for how much I care. I want connection, but I don't know how to ask for it without feeling weak. So instead of saying, I'm scared, we say, I'm above it. Instead of saying, I'm lonely, we say, I like being alone. Instead of saying, I feel invisible, we say, they're not worth my time. But here's the trap. Once shame and superiority both take root in your psyche, they create a psychological deadlock. You can't move forward, and you can't go back. Because when you feel the desire to connect, shame pulls you down. They'll never accept you. And when you try to reach out anyway, superiority kicks in. You shouldn't need anyone anyway. It's emotional paralysis, a loop of self-abandonment. Every attempt at connection feels like walking into a trap. You hesitate to message someone because shame says, you're annoying. You hesitate to tell the truth because superiority says, you're better than this emotional nonsense. And round you go. Even when someone reaches out to you, even when someone tries to love you, you might push them away. You question their motives. You find reasons not to trust them. You tell yourself, they don't really care, before they even have the chance to prove you wrong. It's not because you don't want love. It's because you've already prepared for the moment it gets taken away. That's the reality of the double bind. It doesn't just confuse you, it exhausts you, constantly evaluating every interaction for signs of betrayal, constantly managing the contradiction between yearning and judgment, hunger and pride, desperation and denial. And perhaps the most dangerous part, you begin to mistake this dynamic for your personality. You say things like, I'm just not a people person. I'm independent to a fault. I'm not emotional like others. And while there may be truth in that, these statements often serve as shortcuts, narratives that keep you from digging deeper, from asking the hard questions like, am I truly content, or have I just numbed myself into submission? Is this solitude or self-sabotage? The real cost of this internal conflict isn't always obvious on the surface. You may function perfectly fine. You might have a job, a routine, a life. But emotionally, you're starving. Every moment of silence feels a little heavier. Every laugh you witness from afar feels a little more distant. Every time someone opens up to you, and you freeze, not because you don't care, but because you don't know how to care anymore. You feel a little more hollow. You crave belonging, but only on terms that don't exist. Terms where you'll never be judged, never rejected, never misunderstood. In other words, conditions where real connection is impossible. And slowly, it begins to feel safer to expect nothing, to ask for nothing, to need nothing. But here's the truth you must confront. That numbness, it's not protection, it's the side effect of prolonged emotional starvation. And the longer you stay trapped between shame and superiority, the harder it becomes to feel anything at all. You're not healed, you're hidden. Not free, just untouched. Not strong, just unreachable. So how do you break the double bind? Not by choosing one side over the other. Not by pretending shame doesn't exist. Not by denying your defense of superiority. But by seeing both and understanding that neither one is the truth. Shame isn't your identity. Superiority isn't your salvation. They are strategies, both of them. Strategies that once kept you safe, but now keep you stuck. And the first act of freedom is naming the trap. It's whispering to yourself in the quiet moments. I know this isn't who I really am. I know there's more to me than this constant emotional tug-of-war. Because the moment you speak that truth, even in a whisper, you create a crack in the cycle. A place where honesty can slip through. A space where healing can begin. Not in grand gestures, but in subtle shifts. You begin to notice when shame speaks, and you pause instead of obeying it. You recognize the voice of superiority, and you don't let it steer the wheel. You learn to sit in discomfort without collapsing into defense. And over time, with practice and compassion, you begin to reconnect with a version of yourself that isn't governed by fear or pride or pain. A version of yourself that still knows how to love, how to trust, how to belong. Not perfectly, but honestly. That's the only path forward. And it always begins here. With the courage to say, I want to be free, even if it scares. There's a moment in every deep transformation where something inside you breaks, not in a way that signals defeat, but in a way that signifies rupture. The false image collapses. The polished persona melts. The tight grip on what you thought was control dissolves into ash, and you're left with the rawest, most unfiltered truth of all. You don't know who you are without the pain you've carried. It's disorienting. You thought healing would feel like floating, like clarity, like peace. But instead, it feels like chaos, like sitting in the center of a storm that's been brewing for years. Only now you finally stopped pretending it wasn't there. And this is where the real work begins. Because healing is not a light switch. You don't just discover your shadow, cry once, and then magically wake up whole. The discovery is just the crack, the initiation. What comes next is the fire, the sacred fire. It's the relentless burn of looking at everything you've denied, disowned, or distorted in order to survive. It's the radical act of reclaiming the pieces of yourself that the world said were too much, too ugly, too dangerous, too emotional. It starts small. You catch yourself reacting with anger, and instead of shoving it down, you pause. You ask, what are you trying to protect? You feel a rush of envy, and instead of turning it into self-hatred or bitterness, you ask, what unmet need is this pointing to? You sit with guilt, not to drown in it, but to learn from it. You sit with shame, not to reinforce it, but to listen to what it's still hiding. This is emotional alchemy, the turning of lead into gold. Not by erasing your darkness, but by understanding it. And it's brutal. Because to do this work, you have to be willing to see the ways you've betrayed yourself. You have to look at the moments you stayed silent when you should have roared. The times you shrank to be loved. The years you wore a smile like armor and convinced yourself that being numb was the same as being safe. You have to look at the destruction. Not just the pain others caused you, but the pain you caused yourself. That's what most people never talk about. We love the narrative of the wounded hero who triumphs over adversity. But what about the quiet, exiled parts of us we pushed away in the process? The parts we hurt in order to be accepted? The anger we buried to appear composed? The grief we swallowed because no one wants to hear about that? To truly reclaim yourself, you must sit with every version of you that didn't get a voice. Every version that was told, not now. You're too emotional. You're too intense. You're too soft. You're too loud. You must sit with your former selves, not with judgment, but with reverence. Because those versions, they carried you here. Even in their brokenness, they fought to keep you alive. Even when they self-sabotaged, they were just trying to protect the last sacred thing they had left. Your truth. So when you feel the fire rise, when the anger comes up again, or the sadness feels unbearable, or the shame screams louder than ever, don't push it away. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to explain it. Just listen. Say to that voice inside, I hear you. You're allowed to speak. You don't have to fight for my attention anymore. That's when the fire stops being destructive and starts becoming sacred. Because it's not there to burn you down. It's there to burn away what's false. All the roles you played to be liked, all the masks you wore to avoid rejection, all the lies you told yourself just to get through the day. Gone. Reduced to ash. And in the center of that fire, you begin to find something ancient and immovable. Self-recognition. Not the curated self. Not the public self. Not the self you've carefully constructed for approval. The real self. The one that's messy, flawed, honest, wild and tender. The one you buried because the world didn't know how to hold it. The one you thought you had to kill in order to survive. And when you meet that version again, when you look into their eyes and say, I see you, something miraculous happens. You stop running. You stop needing to be seen by others, because finally, you see yourself. You stop craving constant validation, because your worth is no longer something external to be earned. It's something internal to be remembered. That's the paradox of shadow work. You go into the darkness thinking it will destroy you, but what it destroys is your illusions, and what it reveals is your essence. So no, this part of the journey isn't glamorous. It's not Instagrammable. There are no quotes that can fully capture it, no aesthetic candle-lit altars that can soften it. It's ugly. It's sweaty. It's exhausting. It's nights where you cry on the bathroom floor, and mornings where you look in the mirror and see both a stranger and your truest self at the same time. It's trembling hands, writing down everything you were told not to feel. It's conversations where your voice shakes, but you speak anyway. It's telling someone no for the first time and realizing you don't owe anyone an apology for existing. This is what reclamation looks like. Not the reclaiming of some perfect self, but the reclaiming of your whole self, and that includes the parts that make people uncomfortable, the anger that still lingers, the needs you tried to outgrow, the desire to be seen, held, known, not just for your light, but for your shadow too. Because here's the truth most people avoid. You will never be whole until you love what you were taught to hide. You will never feel safe in your own body until you stop punishing it for feeling. You will never feel fully alive until you stop editing your soul for consumption. And most importantly, you will never be free until you stop fearing your own fire. You are not too much. You are not too broken. You are not too emotional. You are not beyond redemption. You are sacred, even in your rage, even in your grief, even in your confusion, your mess, your chaos, especially in your chaos, because that's where the soul lives. Not in perfection, but in presence. Not in polished self-help mantras, but in raw, unfiltered honesty. This is the sacred fire, and if you let it, it will purify you, not by making you someone new, but by burning away everything that's not truly you. So sit with it. Feel it all. Let it rise. Let it roar. Then walk forward, ashes on your skin, scars on your heart, eyes full of the truth you've been avoiding your whole life. You don't need to be anyone else. You only need to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. There's a silence that follows confrontation. Not a peaceful silence, but a loaded one. The kind of quiet that hums with aftermath, with recognition, with the weight of everything you finally admitted to yourself. That's where we are now. Not at the end of healing, but at the place where healing can begin. Not in triumph, but in the decision to stay, with yourself, in the wreckage, in the mess, in the rawness that follows radical truth. You've descended. You've faced the mirror and didn't flinch. You've dragged the shadow into the light, not to shame it, but to say, I see you. I know you're me. That moment changes you, not because it makes you perfect, but because it breaks the illusion that you needed to be. And now, the real work begins. Because once you've reclaimed those exiled parts, they don't vanish. They integrate. They come home. And integration is not a cinematic moment of clarity. It's slow, uncomfortable, and often terrifying. It means you no longer have the excuse of ignorance. You know what drives your outbursts now. You know what fuels your withdrawal, your coldness, your hunger for approval. You know what's under the anger, behind the shame, beneath the silence. So what do with all that knowledge? You hold it. You hold yourself. You stop treating your emotions like enemies and begin to treat them like messengers. Not always correct, not always rational, but always honest. You listen. You respond. You stay. Self-compassion becomes your discipline. Not soft, fluffy affirmations, but a fierce loyalty to your own heart. You stop abandoning yourself when you're messy. You stop editing your truth to be more likable. You stop performing pain just to be understood, or hiding it to seem strong. You speak, even when your voice shakes. You draw boundaries, even when it disappoints others. You feel everything, not all at once, but on purpose. You give anger its space without letting it take the wheel. You sit with grief like it's an old friend. You let joy in without waiting for it to leave. You start to trust yourself again, not because you're healed, but because you're healing, and that's enough. Here's the part they don't tell you. After the breakdown, after the confrontation, there's no clean slate. There's only you, more honest, more whole, and more accountable. That's when the invitations come. Not from the world, from your life. You notice the way you speak to yourself in the mirror. You catch the apology forming in your throat when you did nothing wrong. You feel the hesitation when you want to ask for support, and instead of pushing it away, you stay with it. You say, I hear you, and you mean it. This is what it means to rebuild trust with yourself. It doesn't come from a book. It doesn't come from the perfect plan. It comes from 1,000 small moments of integrity, of doing what you said you would do, of resting when you promised you would, of walking away when your body screams, this isn't safe, of speaking the truth even when your voice cracks like dry wood. And slowly, so slowly, something begins to grow. Self-respect, not pride, not ego, not arrogance, self-respect, The kind that says, I will no longer treat myself as disposable just to be accepted. The kind that says, my needs matter, even if no one claps for them. The kind that refuses to abandon the parts of you that the world told you were too loud, too soft, too much. This self-respect becomes a compass. It changes the way you move through rooms. It changes the way you sit at tables. It changes the kind of love you seek and the kind of love you allow. You stop auditioning for love. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop shrinking to fit into relationships that require a smaller version of you to function. Instead, you grow. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes in chaos. Sometimes with relapses and backslides and nights that feel like unraveling all over again. But it's not the same. You're not starting over. You're moving deeper. Every time you fall into a more honest layer of yourself. Because here's the truth. You don't need to be someone new. You don't need to be better. You just need to be whole. And wholeness includes the parts that still hurt. The parts that don't always get it right. The parts that are healing out loud. The idea that we must become perfect to be lovable is the final lie. You are not here to be a sculpture, polished and admired. You are here to be a fire. A living, breathing force of nature that illuminates and burns and purifies and destroys what no longer serves. You are not your shame. You are the one who survived it. You are not your rage. You are the one willing to listen to it. You are not your fear. You are the one choosing to keep walking anyway. And now that you've seen the shadow, you know the truth. It never wanted to destroy you. It wanted to be heard. It wanted to be integrated. It wanted to be loved. Not in spite of its darkness, but because of it. You can't be whole if you're still at war with half of who you are. So let the war end. Drop the sword. Release the armor. Light the candle. Look yourself in the eyes and say, I don't need to be fixed. I just need to be felt. Because that is where liberation begins. Not in conquering your wounds, but in sitting with them. Not in transcending your flaws, but in holding them with tenderness. You begin to embody the truth. Not speak it. You begin to show up as yourself, not your performance. You stop chasing healing and start living it. This is not the end of your journey. This is the turning point. This is where you become dangerous. Not because you're violent, but because you're no longer manipulable. You no longer fear rejection because you no longer reject yourself. You no longer chase validation because your worth is no longer on the auction block. You don't flinch when you feel deeply because you've stopped seeing emotion as a weakness. You know now, emotion is aliveness. To feel fully is to live fully. And yes, that comes with risk. It comes with heartbreak. It comes with discomfort. But it also comes with freedom, with power, with a life that actually feels like yours. So let the shadow walk beside you now. Not as a threat, but as a guide. Let it remind you who you are when you're not performing. Let it be the compass that keeps you honest. Let it be the fire that keeps you awake. Because this is it. Not perfection, not enlightenment, but embodiment. This is wholeness. This is home.